Hello and welcome to this episode of Pharmacy in Flux. I'm your host, Derek DeRosie, along with my co-host, Phil Hauser. How are you doing today, Phil?
Doing good. Glad to be here. Thanks.
It's great. I'm excited about our topic today and our guest. We have a unique guest with us today, and we're going to address a topic that I think a lot of pharmacists think about, but don't really delve into in too much depth, and probably not nearly as much depth as they should when designing a pharmacy. So our guest today is Guy Shaddock of Guy Shaddock Design. Guy has been designing pharmacies for 20 years. He's designed over 150 pharmacies throughout BC and Alberta. He's also designed some dental offices, about 15 medical clinics, and even a few clean rooms. So he has a tremendous amount of experience in designing pharmacies, and we're going to pick his brain today and find out about the things you should be thinking about as a pharmacist when planning out a space for a pharmacy. So Guy, glad to have you on board. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here as well. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to jump right in with a really broad brush question here and start things off with something that's near and dear to Phil's heart and my heart, and that's around the topic of business plans. So, from your perspective, is it really important? Does pharmacy design all start with really having a proper business plan?
Absolutely. A business plan is something that you put down on paper. You develop a strategy. You come up with solutions, and it becomes pretty evident when you're looking at that piece of paper where the weaknesses and the strengths are of a business plan. And isn't that exactly what a plan is all about? An architectural plan? That's what people do. They look at the plan, and people meaning engineers, building departments, as well as pharmacists, as well as designers. It's a tool that's used to develop a strategy to come up with the best solutions.
Excellent. That
Guy,
reinforces what Phil and I are always thinking from a business plan perspective.
Guy, what's your process when you sit down with a pharmacy professional for the first time who's thinking of building out a new space?
The first thing I usually discuss is what do you anticipate using your pharmacy space for? And there's variation. Some people uh, require a large compounding area because they're doing a fair amount of compounding. Other pharmacists just require a small area beside the double sink. So there's variation in that. So what I'll do is I'll discuss that with the pharmacist and come up with a solution that divvies up the space, so to speak, to accommodate their special needs, their individual needs.
So I think what you're saying there, Guy, if I'm hearing you correctly, is it's really important for you to have a conversation with the owner about what kind of pharmacy practice they want to have and what kind of business they envision having in terms of the types of products and services that they're going to offer, because those things dramatically influence how the space planning goes.
That's exactly right, Derek. That's exactly what it's all about. And that needs to be discussed. It's because pharmacies are different. Pharmacists are using the space differentially depending on their needs. So that's exactly right.
Well, that's great because it really reinforces the business plan thing again, saying, I mean, if somebody shows up and says, hey, I've got 1,500 square feet, design me a pharmacy, you have no idea what to do with that space unless you really know what their vision is. And so they need to have a vision, and that should be set in their business plan.
Exactly. And that ties back to the business plan, doesn't it? If they want to have a clinic, as an example, they're going to be looking at a larger space than they would if they want to have just a small dispensing type of pharmacy. So it all ties back into the business plan for sure.
Guy,
Terrific.
typically when you sit down with somebody who's inexperienced, and this is sort of their first opportunity, what do they typically ask you right away? What are sort of the first one or two questions that they would typically ask you?
Well, I hate to be facetious here, but it's very common for them to say, "What color of walls do you think I should paint the pharmacy?" They they tend to start at the wrong place. And
Yeah.
I think this is where experts and people that are involved in the business become so important, as we kind of channeled the discussion and the thinking in the right direction.
That's I think that's a really great point, and I'd like to come back to that a little later in the conversation about, where's the right place to start, and it probably isn't with the color of the walls. Um, but let's sort of take it back up to a bit of a higher level, and I'd like to get your thoughts around how you go about finding a balance between having a functional design for the pharmacy that suits the type of business and activities that the pharmacist envisions having, and then also creating a great customer experience.
Well, the customer experience, I think, um, the patient, the customer comes in and they have a prescription to be filled. And what they want is they want that prescription as quickly as possible. So this relates to the function of the workspace for the pharmacist. The time between the drop off and the pickup become important, and how that's organized becomes important. So secondary to that is the aesthetics. Aesthetics are important at the end of the day, because you know when a customer looks at an old tired looking space, that sort of sets an image of what they expect to receive in the way of service. So while aesthetics are particularly are important, it's not as important as the function of the workspace. How do you become most effective in the production of or the dispensing process involved for the prescription?
Makes sense for sure.
Yeah. Guy, I want to talk a little bit about millwork being a significant expense when building out a pharmacy. And for everyone listening, we talk about millwork, we're talking about cabinetry, counter or cabinet space, and shelving and things like that. Um, so, what is the order of aesthetic choices when it comes to millwork? Is flooring and wall paint and that more important? How does this fit into the overall plan?
Well, the aesthetics are, when you're choosing color and aesthetics, usually what you do is you'll start with a millwork, because there's far fewer choices in colors in millwork than there is, say, in the wall color. In a wall color, there's millions of choices. But if what you're asking also relates to the function of the cabinets, that is extremely important, because in pharmacy, you want a cabinet that is useful for large printers to sit underneath a cabinet and to pull out for accessibility, so they're not sitting on top of the cabinet. So the function of each of the particular cabinets becomes very important. They're kind of like kitchen cabinets, but in some ways, but in other ways they're not. Uh, they have to be customized because they're higher. They're 39 inches off the floor, rather than, say, in a kitchen, which is about 36 inches off of the floor, because your the way you work as a pharmacist is you're actually, for simplicity's sake, let's say you're counting pills in a kitchen, and so you don't need to put any pressure on whatever's on the counter. So standing upright, the 39-inch height becomes very important. In a kitchen, 36 is optimum, because you're actually pressing down on objects, you're cutting vegetables, etc. So customizing millwork is very important. It's not rocket science. It is basically based out of kitchen cabinets, but the function of each cabinet becomes important too. Like I say, a cabinet that houses a large printer, which are commonly used these days, has to be designed so it can pull out that printer. There has to be a kitchen cabinet that has readily accessible drawers in it for access to vials, etc. That's not something that you can just buy off the shelf. So customization, going to a custom millwork, is very important. Uh, IKEA cabinets for shelving. I highly recommend people to not use IKEA cabinets because while you can put the product on the shelves, you can't put the price tags on the shelves. You have to have the front of the shelf with a price tag holder, so to speak. Ticket molding is actually what it's called. And you don't get that with IKEA cabinets. So, there's a lot of customization involved in pharmacy, even probably more so than any other kind of millwork type of function.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've been a pharmacist for 38 years, and I never ever thought until just now when you mentioned it about the height of the cabinet, and that maybe 3 inch difference and what a difference that makes. I was chuckling internally, a small anecdote to lighten the mood here a bit. I remember a pharmacist in Prince Rupert one time telling me that he was in the pharmacy when an elderly customer of his came in and asked him if he knew how to fillet a fish, a salmon. And he said, sure. And so she flopped a plastic bag on the counter with a big fresh salmon in it and said, can you do this one for me? And he actually pulled out a fillet knife and filleted the salmon right there in the
Oh
pharmacy
my
on the
gosh.
pharmacy counter. So I was thinking about that when you talk about pressing down and pressure and on a 36-inch counter versus 39. But it's quite a funny anecdote. So pharmacists have done all kinds of things over the years, including change watch
Yeah,
batteries and fix cameras and all sorts of stuff. But
yeah.
a funny segue there. But I totally get the point about not using pre-purchased type of fixturing from, for example, like IKEA or something like that, as a generally somebody would only do that as potentially a money saving move. I think to avoid having to pay for custom millwork, but in the long run, they may not really be saving any money because they may have to
It
replace that
it
on a
doesn't
more frequent basis. Yeah,
it doesn't work. There's other reasons too that 3 inches makes a huge difference. I've been to
yeah.
pharmacies that are 38 inches or 37 inches, and the employees and the pharmacists are complaining about backaches because they're leaning over. So there's ergonomic and physical reasons too why that established 39-inch height works well. So
What
it's
about at what about at the front end of the store if there's a, cash register, cashier's desk, and or other fixturing to display product? Should that all be custom done as well, or
of
what's your
course
thoughts on that?
normally they make the cash the same height, 39 inches, and that's only because it's probably simpler to make all of the cabinets 39 inches high. But they possibly could make the cash section lower and to 36 inches. That wouldn't be a problem. It's really the workspace where people are standing there all day that becomes very, very critical. The other thing, it's like a sit down area in semi private consultation, as an example. If you want that, uh, if you want your customer, your patient to sit down, then the height goes down to 30 inches because that's the standard tabletop height. So that has to be factored
Right.
into the design too, depending on the
So that would be
function.
important for the pharmacies that have a kind of a receiving or an intake area where the pharmacist or pharmacy staff person sits down with the patient, maybe at a computer station, to do the intake process.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guy, I have another question about fixturing for product. I've been into a lot of startup pharmacies, one recently not too far from my home, and I see all kinds of different heights of freestanding product holding millwork. What's the standard height for that? And being an old guy who's been around retail pharmacy for many years, height matters because of security and other things. But what should it be? What should the thinking be in terms of freestanding millwork for holding product?
Well, against the wall, I mean, ultimately, given that square footage is so valuable and small spaces are the norm, you really try to maximize how much product you can hold in the store. The best way to do that, in the example of the wall, is to have the shelving run up 7 feet high. 7 feet is the same height as your kitchen cabinets at home, your cupboards at home. It's about the maximum that people can reach. So uh, the ones that are not against the wall, the ones that are, say, gondolas as an island, or perhaps even uh, the shelving that's in front of the dispensing counter, typically are around 54 inches. And that's because that works out well too, to enable the pharmacist and the customer to be able to see each other,
Hmm.
and also maximize the amount of space to hold the product. So there's
Right.
certain numbers that seem to work very well in designs.
I wanted to interject here with something that I just thought of that you made me think of when you mentioned the gondola height, and I was thinking about security from a security perspective and having a view of sort of the entire store from the pharmacy. Pharmacies, the dispensary part of the pharmacy I'm talking here now, are generally raised. How much are those? Is that floor raised from the main floor of the store? And is that still an ongoing design feature of current pharmacies, or are you seeing pharmacies today where the dispensary is not a raised level?
Good question. That just does not happen anymore. Um, things change culturally, I guess is one way to try to explain that phenomenon. But people, pharmacists want to be on the same level as the customer now. In the past, that was different. They wanted to be higher than the customer for whatever reason. Again, something to do with cultural standards than anything else, I believe. But you never see and never want. In fact, some of the pharmacists are actually wanting to take them out because it's a very personal interaction. And when you have the pharmacist standing way above the customer, that that sort of breaks that personal interaction. Like, I'm dominant, that kind of perception. So really what
Yeah,
you want is more of the community exchange ideas, part of you know good human interaction. And the way you do that is to not have a platform that the pharmacist stands on.
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So, Guy, I guess I want to ask the question that probably a lot of viewers watching this right now are going to want to know, and that's what is it going to cost me to build out a pharmacy, sort of in rough terms? It's around 1,500, 2,000 square feet. What are we looking at here?
There's a huge amount of variability in the cost, and the reason for that is is it a new build? The costs are less for a new build than, say, a renovation where there's tear out involved, et cetera, et cetera. There's also you also need to consider, what the budget is. Going back to the business plan, you know, are you going to have high end millwork, or are you going to have millwork that is functional? And there's and the relationship there's the cost. One is more costly than the other. So the business plan kind of dictates an awful lot, what value you're putting into the fixtures. But to answer your question simply, I've done them for less than $100 a square foot, and I've done them for an awful lot more than $100 a square foot. But if you take $100 a square foot, it sort of will get you started. It'll get you into
Okay.
the ballpark, so to speak.
So we could say $100 a square foot is probably a minimum, in terms of designing something that's at least functional and building it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can. I've done them for less than $100 a square foot. This would be, say, a white melamine cabinet. Everything is white melamine, which is readily available. You can buy at Home Depot, compared to a more expensive type of millwork. You know, uh, Maybe you're putting in nice accent lighting in one situation, and in the other you're not. You're putting in just 2x4 fluorescent lighting. So there's, you know, that in that scenario you're going to be spending less. Uh, in the scenario where you're putting accent lighting in and LED, expensive overhead fixtures, that's obviously going to cost you more. And there's benefits for both, both in
Yeah.
budget and the end result aesthetically.
In
Just
in
another.
terms of cost. Oh, sorry, Phil. Go ahead.
I just want to ask you one more thing while we're talking about this. Is flooring's a huge part of this because it's where all the wear and tear happens, probably more so on the floor than any other part of the pharmacy. And see a lot of pharmacies that have carpeting in them. Uh, and I can't imagine keeping carpeting clean and all the rest of that. What do you think is the best flooring to put down in a pharmacy today?
Well, the quote unquote best bang for the buck is vinyl strip flooring. Um, Years ago, they used to put in that 12 by 12, what's called VCT, vinyl composite tile, and
Yeah,
you'll see that still used actually in some of the low end type of big box stores or whatever. Um, but that square tile was very durable, and that's why you'll see pharmacies even today with that type of flooring that's still there that was put in 40 years ago. It's extremely durable. And vinyl strip flooring is actually it's in the same family of durability and longevity, except it has the benefit of better choices in color and it looks
mhm,
better. Carpet is
yeah,
the worst thing that you could put into a pharmacy because carpet, as everybody knows, high traffic, it gets dirty very quickly. You're constantly cleaning it, it wears out very quickly. The other options are like ceramic tile. Ceramic tile is bulletproof as far as durability, but it's also more expensive than the vinyl strip flooring. So most of the time, I specify vinyl strip flooring, and people are very happy with it. Sometimes they'll want to go high end look, and that's where the ceramic tile comes in. But
mhm.
I don't think there's. I'm pretty sure there's not a pharmacy I've ever done that has put carpet in the main retail area. That's was done years ago, but it's not done anymore.
Yeah, I worked in some pharmacies that had carpet throughout the entire main retail area, everything, and it doesn't take much more than a child knocking a bottle of cough syrup off the shelf in front of the dispensary. You've got a big red stain in the carpet of some gooey, syrupy stuff, right? Terrible thing. Um, I want to stick with the cost theme for a minute here still and ask, is there a difference in cost between, I'm going to say, a rural and an urban pharmacy from the perspective of in large urban areas, you have a significant number more of different types of contractors that you can draw on, people who do millwork, plumbers, electricians, versus a small community where you might not really have much of a choice of who you use for the contracting. Does that seem to affect price from your perspective?
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely, it does. There's a lot more variation in the costing in a small town than there is in a major city, and it's all related to numbers and competition. And the competition is what balances the costing out in major cities. Now that said, small towns sometimes, since their overhead is less, the contractor in that situation may be less, but in most cases it's more because they're not in competition with anybody else. So that's competition is what really drives the best value, the best pricing for sure.
In terms of contractors, um, are there and in particular, I know let's focus on the millwork side of things. Are there people or companies that really specialize in this area? Like they don't just do millwork in general, but they really specialize, as you do in the design field, in pharmacies and medical dental offices, for example.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. There's millwork companies that specialize in doing home residential kitchens. There's millwork contractors that specialize in doing store fixturing for fashion stores. Um, and there's also contractors that specialize in uh, not particularly specialize in pharmacy, but it represents a fairly large proportion of their business. So obviously, they're going to be probably the best choice to go with.
If they're here in a major urban center like Vancouver, do you know if any of them are willing to travel to remote and rural communities to do the work in the event that there isn't a local contractor in some of these small communities up north or in the Kootenays, for example, or Alberta or whatever that couldn't do the work?
Yeah, well, I've actually worked with mill workers that have traveled from Vancouver here to Calgary to do stores in Calgary. And,
Oh, wow.
oddly enough, uh, they were able to, because one particular contract that I've worked with has done so many pharmacies. He's probably done 80% of the pharmacies I've ever designed. Uh, he actually went to Calgary and went to Edmonton to do projects and was able to outbid other local millwork contractors. And that's because he's done so many of them. He knows exactly what to do, how long it's going to take, and that proved to be a price advantage to my client. So, there are, and that's true of any, not just pharmacy, any industry. There's some mill workers that, for instance, do work for Canada Post that travel all over the country. So, uh, there is sometimes there is an advantage to using a seasoned millwork contractor who really knows how to put these things together. The mill worker I've worked with a lot actually assembles the complete dispensary in his shop and then disassembles it and ships it, or uses his own vehicles, 5-ton trucks or whatever, to transport the pharmacy. So those sorts of things are a big advantage because the shop labor is less expensive than on-site labor. So he can take advantage of that, and coming up with a brilliant idea like pre-assembling the dispensary completely and then disassembling it and taking it to the out-of-town job site gives him a big advantage.
Yeah, I was kind of curious, and this is another another sort of hot topic, and we've touched on it a bit when we talk about clinic space and looking at starting a pharmacy from scratch, for instance, Guy, and I'm keen to put in half of this space into a clinic. How does that affect costs? Are we talking significantly affecting costs, construction and millwork, etc.? How does that look? I'm sure you've run into this before as well.
Well, it kind of balances out. Now, pharmacies are more involved when it comes to specific custom millwork and functions of cabinets. There's more involved in that than there is, say, a clinic. The clinic and exam room, for instance, they don't need anything too special. Really, a simple bottom cabinet and an upper cabinet and a sink. The difference is with a clinic, they require sinks in each of the exam rooms. And plumbing, underground plumbing, is expensive to do. So while they don't have the same costs as far as millwork is concerned, they have more costs when it comes to other things like plumbing, other elements of the construction budget. So at the end of the day, this magic $100 square foot number, it probably works fairly close when you're anticipating the work involved to do a clinic as well.
Mhm.
All right,
The,
so
you know,
let's
the other
talk.
thing, just to add to that point, I've the clinics that I design, they have to account for things that the pharmacist doesn't have to account for, the sinks, the plumbing, that sort of thing, but also how the air is distributed between the exam rooms. There should be what's called sound air boots, which prevents discussions that the doctor is having in one exam room being heard by the next exam room, people in the next exam room. You put a device, so to speak, to reduce the sound level. You put insulation in the walls in between the exam rooms. You put soundboards in some cases just to uh, help with that sound transmission issue. So there's, in one case in the clinic, there's going to be more expenditures in something that you don't have in a pharmacy, you know. So, but like I say, some these things usually work out at the end of the day to be one balances the other out when it comes to costing.
Okay, great.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about the sound issue within doctor's offices. It makes a lot of sense from a confidentiality perspective. Let's talk contractors for a minute here, Guy, and just give us sort of your Coles Notes version of what I should look for. Let's, for argument's sake, say I've got a space, I'm building out a new pharmacy, I've hired you, you've done the design. What do I look for in a contractor now? What what things should I
Never
be?
never hire your uncle who's in the construction. That's first and foremost because you're going to be put down on the bottom of the priority list. Always hire a contractor that specializes in tenant improvement work. He's going to have the resources, meaning his subtrades who are also involved in tenant improvement work. Tenant improvement work is an industry of its own. Um, the electricians are used to only spending 4 or 5 hours on one site and then rocketing off to another site. It's part of the nature of the tenant improvement industry. So you want to get a contractor that specializes in tenant improvement work, not a home builder. You're asking for trouble if you get a home builder to build your pharmacy. The other
Uh,
thing I think that's really critical, really important is to never just look at the bottom line. And to be honest, that happens so often. It's scary. The bottom line, you need to assess the what the contractor is doing for the money. You have to uh, objectively look at different contractors bidding on the job and compare apples to apples. That's important. Um, and that takes a bit of experience. Designers and good contractors will give you that type of feedback. They will articulate exactly what they're doing for their money, and so never just it isn't a simple choice. It's a choice that involves some analysis.
Hmm.
And then the old adage of good, fast, and cheap applies very well too. You can only choose two of those three. If you want good, it's not going to be fast, and if you want good, it's not going to be cheap. Sorry, you can only choose one. If you want good, it's not going to be fast and cheap. If you want cheap, it's not going to be good and fast. So, if you use that principle, think about it and apply it to, your decision making, then that tends to really say an awful lot about the contractor and the numbers that you're looking at. And that's after you've done an analysis of are we comparing apples to apples?
if you've done a design for somebody, do you have contractors that you have worked with that you would recommend to people? Like if people didn't know and they said, well, okay, you designed my pharmacy, but can you help me choose a contractor? Is that a service that you also provide as a designer?
Yes, I've been doing that for years. I've worked with maybe three different contractors for 20 years in the pharmacy business that I would recommend. And you know, and they know that I know the numbers, and I'm giving my client, the pharmacist, the feedback on those numbers. So, they're they've given very good pricing over the years. And they tend to get tested with the pharmacist will say, well, I have a contractor that I would like to use. He's one of my customers. I'd like to use him. Um, and those sorts of situations have been tested costing wise. And these reliable, consistent contractors, they may not necessarily always be the lowest costing, and they're not always the highest costing. In fact, they're usually never the highest costing. They're right in the middle of the costing, and that's a good sign. That means you're getting good value based on the marketplace.
Great.
Guy, say I'm a first-time owner, and instead of starting one up, I'm looking at making an acquisition, and it's an older pharmacy, and it certainly needs renovating. And I come to you and I say, Guy, bought this pharmacy, and here's what it looks like. I need to do some upgrades. Where do you kind of lead into that conversation? Because I'm sure you've done those before as well.
Absolutely. Renovations are very difficult. Um, First off, it's more expensive to do a renovation because you've got tear out, you're trying to keep the pharmacy running, open for business. So you've got working hours by the contractors that affect the pricing. Uh, you know, there's disruption to the whole function of the pharmacy. Renovations are very, very challenging, but they can be
Um,
done. I've done a number of them. I've actually done pharmacies where they moved from the old pharmacy uh, after closing Saturday at noon on a long weekend and reopened first thing Tuesday morning. It's possible to do, but like I say, it's always more expensive, always. And getting a designer that has experience with that type of situation is helpful because the designer is going to put that into perspective. He's going to come up with a solution that represents not tearing the whole pharmacy out, but perhaps just doing sections, either one time period or another, or he's going to design it so he's trying to minimize the amount of work that has to be done. So he or she is going to minimize the amount of work. So it's important in that scenario to have a good designer that has familiarity with operating pharmacies.
what Guy, what should I expect? I'm a pharmacy owner, and I'm either building out a new space or I'm renovating a pharmacy space. What kind of expectation should I have from the landlord in terms of contributing to not only the cost but providing information or doing things that are specific related to my build out or renovation?
That's a good question, and that kind of relates to tenant improvement allowances. So in most cases, that involves new spaces, but not always. But the objective of a tenant improvement allowance is to provide the tenant some money to put into elements of the construction that the tenant won't be taking out when they leave. An example of that may be the ceiling and the lighting. So the tenant improvement allowance allows the tenant to gives the tenant some money to put the ceiling and the lighting in, or fixtures in the washroom. The tenant won't be taking the toilets out with them when they move. So that's something that
We
an
hope not.
improvement
I hope not.
allows
Yeah.
for. And there's I've seen it happen. Actually, I should.
Well, yeah, I'm laughing
I've seen
because I
it
can only imagine. It's
happen.
like I put this in, I'm entitled to it. It's mine.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Are landlords, is it generally usually just a financial commitment of a certain amount, or are there times when a landlord will absolutely specify exactly what they're willing to support from a financial, like they may say exactly like you said, we will pay for the ceiling or the fixturing in the washroom or the plumbing or whatever.
Exactly. And that is always written in the lease. It's a schedule of landlord's work. It's always written into the lease. And, it's important to, when you take possession of the property, and usually that involves the time that the landlord has given you the keys to the property. Now you're taking possession of it. It's a good idea to make sure that whatever was written into the lease, the schedule of landlord's work, is actually what got done and is complete. So, yeah, absolutely. The landlord really wants to specify or has to specify what he's putting into the space. When I say has to, that's not exactly right, because some landlords actually, in fact, it's more common now when there's high product demand in the marketplace for landlords to say, "I'm giving you the space as is," you know. Um, but the reality is good landlords, good leases, etc. There's going to be a provision that the landlord is giving you some money to upgrade what he knows you're going to be leaving behind.
So,
It's not
so
go ahead.
well, you made me think of something else. If I go buy a home, and I'm working with a realtor, and I'm thinking about I go see a house, and what, this is really nice. I might want to make an offer on this. And I do. One of the things that I'm going to do, one of the conditions precedent around that is going to be subject to it passing an inspection from a home inspection person, specialist. Is inspecting business premises? I don't get the sense that that's a common thing, but should people be doing that if they're taking on a business that's already been built out, or a space that's already been built out to some degree, and having it inspected before they sign on to a lease?
Absolutely. I mean, and to be honest, it's not done very often by pharmacists, and that's understandable. It's not their business, and they may go into a space and think this will be perfect, but if they bring a designer or a contractor along with them to look at the space, which is what I would recommend, the designer or contractor has the experience and will know and will look at it from a set of eyes that suggests how much money needs to be spent to upgrade the electrical panel, to provide proper air distribution in the HVAC system, et cetera, et cetera. You need an experienced person to do that, because you're not going to see it. If you're a pharmacist, you're not going to see that. So it's another reason to bring in a professional, somebody who's in the business. And
Yep.
there is no private inspection business like there is in homes for commercial tenant improvement work. You have to rely on designers and contractors.
Wow. Okay, my head is
Uh,
just swimming with information here. Phil, any last questions or burning issues to pose at Guy here?
well, just again, just to step back one step about the landlord, when we talked about TIs or tenant improvements, is any of that negotiable, Guy? Can you negotiate with landlords in terms of what that looks like? I know you said it's a schedule on the lease. Is that going to be fixed on his part, his or her part, or is it something I can go, well, hey, look, I think I need more because this, and that. Is that something you can negotiate with the landlord?
Well, yes and no. I mean, you know, these landlords are pretty sharp and have been doing this kind of thing for a long time. So you're up against somebody who has a whole lot of knowledge. And sometimes what they'll do is, oh yes, I'll give you $50,000 tenant improvement, but I need to change the lease rate. So you end up paying
Paying
one
for it
way or the
anyway,
other.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's it's a tricky situation for sure.
Mm.
Uh, I don't know. I don't know what the best answer is to that. It's a tricky situation to play around with those numbers because both sides are going to be doing it. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we're getting into lawyer territory here now for sure. So
Exactly.
we'll have to have a legal expert on and pose that question. Look, Guy,
Yeah, for
my
sure.
head, as I said, is just swimming with an amazing amount of information. And you've, I've been in this industry for 38 years, and Phil's been in the industry for 40 years. And so between us, 78 years, and I think we heard a bunch of stuff today that I never really thought about at certain levels of detail. And it really drives home the point to me. I think two things. One is the importance of having a business plan, so you have a vision for yourself as the owner of the business, the pharmacist, of what you want, but also hiring somebody, an expert like yourself, to do the design work, and work with contractors, so you actually get what it is you want and what it is you need, and what's going to give not only you the best functional space, but also your customers the best experience. And it's just there's so many facets of it that need to be considered. So I'm just overwhelmed, but I think awesomely grateful for having you on the program, and really providing us with some terrific insights into building out a pharmacy. Any passing last comments from your end, Phil?
No, again, I agree with you 100%. And I have worked with Guy on a project in the past, on a small community pharmacy in the Okanagan here in BC, and he made my life very easy when it came down to a lot of decision-making processes. So it's really great to have you with us today, Guy, and we look forward to having a lot of our viewers reach out to you if they have any further questions. We'd be happy to share that information with them.
Yeah, thanks for
Very
that,
good.
Phil. I was just about to say that if any of our viewers or listeners want to contact Guy, you can reach out to us directly, to Phil or I, through the rxownership.ca website. Our phone numbers and email addresses are there, and then we can put you directly in touch with Guy Shaddock Design. Guy, thanks again for being with us today. We really appreciate your input.
Okay, and just one more thing I might add. Of course, it's my bias because I am a designer, but the value of plans cannot be understated. Uh, the quality of the plan has so much information on it that all parties use, the contractors, the building departments, uh, the client, the pharmacist, you know, getting an idea of how the workspace is going to work out for them, the quality, and it's based, like the business plan, it's based on uh, putting everything down on paper before you go to build. And you know, once you're in the building stage, that's where the costs, that's where the money is being spent. So the more time you spend on a good quality business plan, a good quality set of plans, it's going to save you money, time, et cetera, in the long run. It sounds cliche, but you know, plan the work and then work the plan.
Well, on that note, a great summary. Thanks again very much. To our viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pharmacy in Flux. We'll catch you next time.